This unusually high turnout suggests we have a very, very interesting book to talk about, which we have. It's a very unusual book that explores the links between art and human rights. And we are lucky to have two editors with us today, Eliza Garnsey and Caitlin Hamilton. Both Eliza and Kate are also as unusual as the book itself. They're very interdisciplinary scholars, but they also have very unusual trajectories in their work, in part because academic life is not easy at the moment, and they had to navigate the difficulties of the academic job market and work in numerous associated ways, but also because they think outside the box. So Eliza Garnsey is an independent scholar whose work crisscrosses human rights, arts, and political change. She has a PhD from Cambridge University, has had a postdoc at Cambridge, and then a fellowship as well as the University College London. She is the author of several really, really good articles, 2 books, including this one here, The Justice of Visual Art, Creative State Building in Times of Political Transition, with Cambridge University Press. It's a real fantastic book. And when it came out, I was lucky to be able to endorse it, I think in 2020 or so. Now, Eliza joins us from Abu Dhabi, so from a different part of the world. And welcome, Eliza.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
It's great to have you here. She's been here in person before for a seminar a few years ago, so it's good to have you back, and this time online. Caitlin Hamilton, same thing, has a very, very wide range of experiences in law, academia, and in publishing. She's the founder of Hamilton Compass, which is a kind of an organization she founded that helps academics, scholars, PhD students in their work. And she has a fantastic blog that she is doing as part of this. And I know several of us here, I know Adarsh is a super fan of your blog, and so you're very popular here. She too is a very prolific publisher. She's published numerous articles, several edited books, most of them together with Laura Shepard. And she is also, I want to just mention one of her books, this one here, on the everyday artifacts of world politics. It's a really, really fantastic book that looks at international relations in a completely different way, from a different angle that really has you rethink what it's all about. I was lucky to have read a previous version of that as part of her PhD at UNSW, which I examined. And in addition to being an absolutely fantastic PhD, I have to say that the PhD had the absolutely best cover ever of a PhD. It was an actual embroidery. So partly because her work deals with textiles and embroideries and so on. And I'll have it at home, so otherwise I would have it here to show you. Kate, as she goes, is joining us from Sydney. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. And I'm pretty sure you ended up endorsing my book or something along the same lines. So we owe you a big thing. Yes. No, just such a pleasure to be here. And thank you, everyone, for coming out and showing the support.
So look, it's great to have you and be here to discuss this book here that the two of them co-edited, called Creating Justice, Human Rights and Art in Conversation. So I said it's a very, very unusual book, in part because of the format. The format is the chapters are conversations between scholars and artists. So they're framed as a dialogue, not as normal academic book chapters. And they deal with the kind of art spaces that we often think of, including film, painting, sculpture, music, architecture, but also unusual spaces, textiles, jewelry, so art spaces we don't often think about it. Very unusual. I was lucky to do one chapter, one sort of contribution to the book with Shahidul Alam on photography. So it's a real unusual book, and we're very, very lucky to have you with us today. Now, let me maybe ask you first, this is an unusual book, how you came about writing it. You write in your introduction that this is kind of it's been a long passion for both of you, but also this has been part of your collaboration for many years. And why did you end up sort of with that particular kind of project and volume. So
it was your Biza panel that kicked it all off.
Yes, I think like a lot of edited volumes, it starts with the seed of a conference panel and goes from there. So it was a BISA conference panel back in 2020-21 on art and human rights and kind of asking questions around that. And then it was our collaboration together that kind of we went down this passion project to have it in conversation format.
It was, yeah, it was almost an accident. We had a catch-up call scheduled, and Eliza just happened to tell me about this amazing panel she'd put together, and we just started, as often happens dangerously with these things, making bigger and bigger plans. And I think by the end of the call, we'd accidentally, completely unintentionally agreed to work together and put together the volume that ended up being. And part of, I mean, the conversational format, part of it was because we liked the idea of removing ourselves from it. We'd both done, Eliza done a lot of interviews for her book. I'd done a lot of kind of art analysis for mine. And so the idea of bringing those artists' voices in directly instead of mediated through us was really appealing. So that's the official answer. But then unofficially, we very naively at the time thought it would reduce the workload on us and everyone else. And we pitched it as a really tiny time investment on the part of the contributors. We just have to get the transcripts and trim the ends off, and we've got a book. Like, how get it done and dusted by the end of the year. And I think it took us 4 years in the end, and it's not, yeah.
Good.
It wasn't the quick and easy approach that we thought, but it ended up being a very fruitful and rich.
Yes.
But the idea of doing this in the form of dialogue rather than co-authored chapters, that's something you had fairly early on. So that was something you felt was essential to convey why or how the links between art and human rights take place. So you figured that was a format that helped you bring that out better than a conventional structure.
Very much so, because I think we wanted the artists to be a part of it. And we also know that for a lot of people, the idea of sitting down and writing a 5,000-word piece of writing is a really foreign way of, well, is just a very daunting way of working. So
did you team them up, or did you kind of, because there's always kind of a team. So did you actually then put people together, or did you ask them to come up with a collaborator? And also they're from all over the world. It's a very, very diverse book. They're literally geographically, culturally. How did you then actually go about doing these interviews?
So it's been a bit of both. You know, in that first conversation Kate and I had, we put together our dream list of everyone we ever wanted to work with, and kind of went from there. And some people, you know, came back with pairings that they were really keen to do, and other people we paired up. So, and I think the conversational format kind of allowed more for that flexibility. It's much easier to ask people who haven't worked together or who haven't even met in person to have an hour's chat over Zoom than it is to sit down and write a more traditional chapter. That kind of wouldn't happen. So I think the conversational format is quite liberating in that sense, because it builds this community in a very organic way. You can sit down and have a coffee with someone and have a chat, and that's a much easier way to come on to some or to approach some very big topics, I think.
And then the trick is an impeccable spreadsheet where you track who's sent what email where and when to follow up, and at what point to cut your losses, and how do we replace them. And but the diversity was also something that we really were aware of at the outset and worked towards. So that was a really intentional part of the project, that we wanted to just make sure that, because it's very easy when you're working within established networks as well, which we could have done, to fall into very global minority focused participants. But it's the variety of voices was worth it.
What did you think you managed to sort of get out of the conversations out of the book in general that you couldn't have gotten out had you gone with the more conventional format? Like, was there kind of, do you feel that's uniquely suited to express why art, and you might want to talk a bit more afterwards about the variety of art forms, why art is so essential for politics, for the promotion of human rights? Do you think that the dialogical format allowed you to do things you couldn't have done otherwise?
I think all of the conversations went in directions that we could never have predicted or wanted to predict. And it was the interplay in the conversations that just took it in such dynamic, interesting directions that needed that kind of dialogic engagement, I think, to work. There was a magic in it for me, at least.
Yeah, I think so too. And, you know, part of that magic, I think, emerges from a conversation. In the book, there's the beautiful weaving between this kind of very personal stories and then linking those to, you know, global themes and big questions. But like most conversations, it's just this back and forth weaving, and then you know, tangent on it about an anecdote, and then come back to the kind of big picture questions. And so that's what the format of the conversation allowed for, is this very personal experience to emerge about you know, sort of certain global events. I think that in ways that perhaps might not come up in other forms of writing, but it also allowed us to keep you know, idiosyncrasies of speech and syntax and all the things that make conversations beautiful to have. We really tried to keep in the book, so that when people are reading the book, you kind of hopefully can almost hear that conversation or get a real sense of the people involved who are having that conversation.
So you kept the editing quite light then when you kind of did you worked on the initially recorded dialogues and...
Yeah, very, very much so, and very consciously so, because the different voices adds that texture to the book that we wanted to keep. And it was so we had the absolute support of both the series editors and Roman and Littlefield. There was never any concerns expressed to us or any pushback or any pressure, or they just, yeah, really got from the outset. Even I think when we weren't entirely, I think we were both quite surprised that everyone was just like, yeah, go for it. Like, why not? You know, oh, okay. But yeah, we wanted to keep the tone there very much.
Yep. Would you like perhaps to illustrate a couple of sort of samples that for you kind of struck out from that process, particular chapters or particular elements that you felt were kind of for you illuminating when you did the interviews? And for us to get a bit of a sense of, yeah, what are some of the highlights perhaps that came out as part of this unusual project?
I think there's one line that Kate and I, we speak about quite often, so I might bring it up here. It is kind of lived in our consciousness ever since we heard the conversation, and it's in a chapter with the scholar Arno Kurtz and the artist Elseed, and I made note of it here just to make sure I quote it verbatim. And Arno asks Elseed, "Where is home for you?" And Elseed replies, "Home is where you cook the onions." And he says, in other words, when you're on the road, you never go to a grocery store and buy onions and cook a meal, but when you're home, you do, or at least you can do so. So home for him is where you cook the onions. And this kind of, it was these kind of snippets, I think, that emerged from the conversations that really resonated with us. And this one about the onions, I think had a particular resonance because this book emerged, you know, it's a book of bringing people together and it's a book of connections, but it was happening during COVID. So when the world was highly disconnected and we're all in our homes, this idea of home and belonging and kind of it's what that meant. That's something that stuck with us. And I think we talk about that line quite often as well.
Yeah, it's entered the common, it's entered our shared vocab. And I think as well, hearing you describe it that way, Eliza, just makes me realize how much that concept of home and family and community both relates to human rights with the displacement that we're seeing at the moment and people who aren't safe for whatever reason in the place that they feel is home. And yeah, there was just something about that quote that really resonated for us when we both read it. And I think relatedly, the stuff that stayed with me is the way that so many of the artists linked their work back to really personally meaningful things. So Carey Newman was one of the artists who participated, and he's an amazing, he's a Canadian artist, an Indigenous Canadian artist, and he made this incredible 12-meter long installation, I suppose. It's made out of wood, and it's called the Witness Blanket, and it's designed to bear witness, document, acknowledge the horrific experience of children in residential schools. And just the way he links that back to his culture and his own family and the idea of object biography and how things are given such meaning for him, and the way he talked about that really stayed with me. And even Amy and Miss L are a couple of artists working in the US at the moment. They've got brilliant, look up Cognate Collective. Their work's really, really cool. And they did a project based around the San Isidro port of entry between Tijuana and San Diego. And they've done really, really fun, playful, powerful, political projects. But Amy was talking about how her family's experienced that crossing and how there's that, so much of this work comes from lived experience of human rights, but also politics, of border crossings, of colonialization, of justice experiences. All of those things just kept coming back to people's lives, and that.
So it's that I'm trying to sort of figure out what the key theme is that's woven throughout your chapters and contributions, because they're very diverse. Diverse geographically, they're diverse culturally, they're diverse in art form. So it's an exceptionally diverse book. So do you see that notion of sort of home, or expressed other words, that human rights are not abstract things? They're not sort of, I guess, Kantian universalist principles, but they're things that happen in very concrete circumstances, in people's lives, in concrete sort of environments where culture, politics, human interaction happen. Is that what you kind of see as some of the common themes that emerge from the chapters, or am I reading too much into that?
No, I mean, I love that, because I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with some of the the conversations Kate and I had about kind of what order to put the chapters in because of the themes that were emerging, and how to structure the book. But I think that's what really resonates for me throughout the book, is this idea of it's the personal connections and personal experiences that emerge through the conversations that then resonate much more widely, and hopefully then resonate with readers. And I think that also speaks to not only the conversational format of the book itself, but also the content of in talking about art and arts practices and creative interventions. It's that constant resonance between, or back and forth between, more the personal, the political, the small, the big, the lived experiences, collective experiences, and that's what these conversations. That's the thread that definitely follows through them.
And just, I always go back to every day, because that's where my original research agenda lies, but how I loved in El Cid's chapter that he makes these incredible installations and moves around the world and installs them in different communities, basically. And he talks about getting the buy-in of these communities when he does these amazing like Arabic calligraphy inspired sculptures and murals, but he's talking in this chapter about making friends with garbage collectors in Cairo and keeping in touch with this hillside community of women in Nepal that he worked with. And he mentioned a camel breeder in Tunisia. Like the people that he is bringing together through his art and connecting with and having these conversations with, there's just something in that, back to everyday people doing stuff, that is a recurring theme through these chapters for me that I find really inspiring.
So you both individually, but also collaboratively, you worked on these themes before. Like you've done work on aesthetics, on visuality, on everyday artifacts. You've done very innovative work. You've also done work on human rights, broadly conceived, on questions of gender and so on. If you think back of who you were before you started this new kind of collaborative thing, this dialogical sort of book, has that changed how you look at these issues? Like has doing this somewhat unusual work that's different in the same area, but different in format from what you've previously done, have you walked away with some kind of experience that has changed how you work on human rights and how you work on your work, both sort of academic work, but in a general sense as well?
I think it's the first step of doing something different feels so big and scary, but once you do that, it kind of builds momentum, and it's that first step. And so at the beginning of this project for both of us, it felt really out there, and it came at a point in our academic careers that we were both eyeing up the end of our postdocs and having babies and, big life transitions as well. And I think we both went into it with a sense of not having much to lose, because we didn't know how much longer we would have in academia anyway. So let's do something cool that is personally meaningful with people that we like. And so it's not specifically about approaching human rights or research, but more of a broader, like, just follow those hunches and do it with people that light you up and that you like working with. Because if a quick and easy project is going to turn into 4 years, like, you want it to have meaning for you and to be working with people that you want to spend 4 years with in your inbox almost every day.
Absolutely. I think also this project, I found it really liberating. It was liberating for the reasons Kate just talked about. We didn't have anything to lose, so why not go for it? So we aimed big and we thought, let's do something a bit different. But it was really rewarding, because now, in terms of shaping my thinking about going forward, I think it's one of those cases of when you see something, you can't unsee it. So now I know how, liberating and how rich conversational formats can be. I'm on that track. So all I can think is in this area of work that it's a really kind of meaningful way to do research and grow this community. So I think that's kind of, it's changed, I suppose, for me, my ways of thinking around how to do research, how to know politics, how to answer some of the big questions that I was thinking about previously in my work and going forward.
And that it can be fun and it can be generative, and it can happen in ways that are just the way we work together was so nourishing, I think, through global pandemics, through just the unpredictability of newborn life, and just how we would pick up the project for a couple of months while someone just couldn't, and then you'd take over. And there was just a lovely sense of just total solidarity, I think. And what a gift to find that in a collaborator.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
You both showed incredible persistence, because these projects, they require you to hang in there when, over an extensive period of time, with collaborators who are not always that reliable, and with, publishers are fickle. And so look, the last question I want to ask, before we have so many wonderful and super smart people here, before I ask everyone else to come in, is in terms of, since you finished this book, the world has, I'm not sure what the term is, not necessarily done a turn for the better in many parts of the world. We got conflict, we got authoritarianism reemerging. can you give us a sense, a little bit of where this space of human rights and arts is now, and where the arts might be useful to be a sort of a progressive voice, or be a voice that can counter some of the problematic tendencies you've seen around the world?
I think we need it now more than ever. There's some of the most egregious human rights violations, and so many of them, and all over the place at the moment, that anything that can keep sustained attention on these situations and engagement with them and break through. And I understand it very well that there's almost a sense of too much, and it's easy to become, it's not complacency, but it's just overwhelmed. There's just so much hard stuff happening that it's, I'm sure we've all heard people in our lives say that they just don't read the paper anymore. They just don't watch the news because it's just too much. And I think art, well, anything that can cut through that feels particularly urgent, and we know that art can help do that. I think one of the contributors, Dean Gibson's a documentary filmmaker, and he described art as a Trojan horse, that he makes sports documentaries, but that also includes the very real challenges of the Indigenous Australians face in Australian society. And he sees a sports film as a way of having these really big, important conversations with people who wouldn't otherwise want to have these big, important conversations necessarily. So keep using art to address all of these things, and to keep accessing people who won't necessarily engage with more traditional forms of news. And we also just know that art's helped bring down authoritarian regimes and dictatorships before, and I think there's a few of them that we can direct our art at the moment. I would like to see brought down.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, Kate. With all of that, I think, because the book, the kind of conversational format was about doing it differently, and I think, but that's also the crux of all the conversations in the book, is about the need to do things differently in order to address urgent issues. And hopefully, I think one other thing that just popped to mind, Kate, when you were just talking, was also that I think we hope the conversational format would hopefully, or potentially maybe, also reach a different readership than a traditional edited volume would, because it's kind of, you can dip in and out of conversations, and there aren't hundreds of footnotes, and it's not written in a more traditional academic way. So that hopefully, just as art can hopefully reach different audiences, I think that's something we also hoped for the book to be able to do, to kind of address these pressing issues.
So that is definitely one of the big advantages and big of the selling points of this book. It reads very differently than another book. So I will, if you haven't had a chance to read it, I'll pass it around with the other ones for you to have a look. But look, for now, to both of you, Kate and Eliza, huge thanks. We have both artists and scholars here, and online as well. And we have a half an hour with plenty of time for discussions.